Welcome to the Metabolic Link, a medical and science-focused podcast that explores the common thread of metabolism in health and disease. This is where science meets society. Welcome back to the Metabolic Link, the show where we explore how metabolism connects the dots across human health and disease. I'm your host, Victoria Field, and I am the co-founder of Metabolic Health Initiative, which is the overarching organization to this podcast, Metabolic Health Summit, and our education platform, the Metabolic Initiative. And today we're looking at how decades of nutrition policy may have fundamentally misunderstood the metabolic roots of chronic disease. My guest is Dr. Nina Teicholz, a science journalist and researcher who spent over a decade investigating the evidence behind our national dietary guidelines. Her best-selling book, The Big Fat Surprise, challenged the long-standing war on saturated fat and raised serious questions about how nutrition science has been shaped not just by data, but by politics, industry, and institutional inertia. In this conversation, we get into the metabolic consequences of low-fat era, the rise of seed oils, the collapse of trust in public health nutrition information, and what it would look like to rebuild dietary policy around hard science instead of outdated dogma. If you care about metabolism, chronic disease, or the future of evidence-based nutrition, you are going to want to watch this episode. Dr. Nina Teicholz, thank you so much for joining us on the Metabolic Link. It's so good to have you back. I know you did an episode with Dom, and here we are again to really dig into your amazing work that you are just tirelessly, you're just such a leader in this field. So I'm so thrilled to have you here on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, we're going to dive into all sorts of topics. And I know you and Dom really dug into a lot around cholesterol. So if you haven't watched that episode, certainly dig it up on our channel because it's a really great one. But we're going to cover a few different topics today. But for those who maybe, aren't familiar with your work, I would love to kind of briefly talk about how you really started to understand the low fat dogma and what moment kind of cracked it all open for you?
So I really did not have any background in nutrition. I'm a journalist, and I had been working at National Public Radio. I'd been writing for a whole bunch of publications, and I was assigned to write a story about trans fats for a magazine. I got involved in researching the area of really what we know now as seed oils, because trans fats are made when you harden seed oils. So originally that was for Crisco in 1911. But the byproduct of hardening seed oils is this fatty acid that doesn't exist naturally. They're produced in a factory. So trans fats were like all the rage in the early 2000s. I wrote a story that became huge for what's called Gourmet Magazine. Some of your older listeners may know that. And that sort of was an incredibly, that story sort of blew open the trans fat issue. I got a book contract to write a book about trans fats. And then I started going down the rabbit hole on all dietary fat. I started learning about, I learned about the history of the low fat diet. And also in researching seed oils, I spent 2 or 3 years talking to seed oil scientists, realized the degree of two things. One was fear in the area of research on these oils, like people who had found out problems with seed oils, being harassed at meetings. Wow. The industry group that defends seed oils was hiring people whom I spoke to, who were hired to go to conferences to just harass scientists who were coming up with unfavorable findings for their products.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
And
it's horrible.
I spoke to people who had been visited by the margarine industry, telling the researchers the margarine industry representatives came to them and said, how can we shut this down? Real, almost physical threats. It was like investigating the mafia or something. I was shocked.
What did I get myself into?
And then I would call university scientists and say, I'd love to talk about the low-fat diet. And they would hang up on me. You don't understand, in the early 2000s, people were terrified of even talking about the idea that the low-fat diet had been a mistake. Wow. So This just fascinated me. I mean, as a journalist, my ears, my eyes, everything just perked up. Like, wow, there's a huge story here, right? The covered up all the bad science on cholesterol, on dietary fat, what's good fat versus bad fat, like, which is what we had obsessed about most in nutrition, and I had personally in my life growing up, like avoid all fat, avoid all saturated fat. So I just started researching, and my book eventually kind of mutated from being about trans fats to really focusing on saturated fats, how we got it wrong on saturated fats and how we were wrong to replace them with seed oils.
Yeah, what a wild story. And it's even kind of personal for you, because I know in the past you were, as you mentioned, following some of this dietary advice, right? You were at one point even a vegetarian, I know you've talked about. So would love to hear that experience. And now with what you know now, which is just your wealth of knowledge, what that process for you has been like personally to understand sort of the health effects.
Well, for 25 years, I didn't eat any red meat. I refused to eat butter. I would only drink skim, low-fat everything. My diet was heavily emphasizing grains, fruits, and vegetables. I was 20, 30 pounds heavier than I am now. And I was reluctant to find out what I was finding out. Like, I mean, I was very reluctant to convince myself that what I was discovering could possibly be true. Like, it was a really hard process for me intellectually. Right. And I would lay down on the floor at night in front of my husband, like just on the living room floor, saying, like, I can't possibly be right about this. Like, there's how many decades have we believed this? How can I possibly, like, it didn't seem that I could, what I was finding could possibly be correct.
This huge mountain you've just like literally uncovered that you're basically starting to climb.
And who am I to say this? Like, I'm nobody really. So,
but now you're everybody, because you've literally been leading the charge with your voice. So it's been amazing to watch.
My book really did break it open on saturated fats, right? So it was the cover of Time magazine. It was the cover of New Scientist magazine. I was on all the major TV shows. I mean, it was for a moment, this is now a decade ago, but it was like a huge break open moment on saturated fats. The cover of the Wall Street Journal opinion pages. I mean, it was everywhere.
It's amazing.
And still, it was personally for me really difficult to start eating red meat. I had never cooked it in my life. I had never purchased it in my life.
Wow. So you were a vegetarian for a long time, sounds like.
Well, yes, mostly vegetarian, but I also bringing that into your home, buying it, cooking it.
It's a whole thing.
Seeing it on the red slab of meat on your countertop, seasoning that, putting it. I had no idea what I was doing. I think I burnt every piece of meat I cooked for like
all well done.
5 years.
But you're eating it. That's what matters, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a hard transformation for a lot of people, which is something to recognize, which is that it's hard intellectually when you've believed something your whole life. And then it's hard personally, especially with food, because food is something you eat 3 times a day. Yeah. You know, you only go to church, or those of us who go, or to synagogue or wherever you worship, once a week. But food, you are affirming your beliefs 3 times a day. And I think that creates so much cognitive bias if you were to entertain the idea that you've been doing it wrong, and worse, feeding your children in a way that hasn't been healthy for them.
Do you ever feel off, but your labs come back completely fine? That was me, until I tried Genova Connect. Their at-home test kits go way beyond the basics, measuring real function, like mitochondrial performance, gut balance, detox pathways, and nutrient deficiencies, and more. And here's the best part. These tests don't just spit out numbers. They interpret them. So if you have a nutrient deficiency, they show how it might have developed, what symptoms you could be feeling, and what foods are rich in that nutrient. That level of insight changed everything for me. I personally used the Metabolic Plus and GI Effects panels, and they gave me answers that honestly no other labs ever had. I actually also just took another Metabolomics Plus test because I've been breastfeeding for nearly 2 years and wanted to understand where things stand nutritionally. So I'll be sharing those results soon. And right now you can take 15% off any kit with the code Metabolic Link at gdx.net/themetaboliclink. Again, that's gdx.net/themetaboliclink with code Metabolic Link for 15% off. Now back to our episode. And that's a lot. There's a lot there. It's so difficult. I mean, like, I love the reference that you made because it is like a religion for a lot of people. And I'll have to admit, just because you're talking about your personal background, like, I was a vegetarian. I went vegetarian for 2 years and it wasn't until I had to compete in this fitness competition where it was like I had the chance to win it. My husband at the time, who was my boyfriend at the time, was like, you have to eat this steak. It's going to help you get to where you want to go. I ate it and I won, and I was like, okay, that's it. That was the turning point for me. But, you know, choosing quality meats and all of those things has sort of evolved over time for us. But where did we go wrong? What happened? Sort of give us the overview, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure some of your followers will know this story, yes. But the beginning of our current beliefs that really started in the 1950s, where the nation was in a panic because heart disease had risen from pretty much out of nowhere in the early 1900s to become the #1 killer disease. So President Eisenhower himself has a heart attack in 1955. He's out of the Oval Office for 10 days, and everybody is flummoxed. What causes heart disease? And there were a number of competing theories in the time that were promoted by leading scientists. Like, it could be vitamin deficiency. It could be the rising tide of auto exhaust that with the greater number of cars on the street. It could be the type A personality where you go around yelling at people all day and then, you have a heart attack. Those were legitimate theories proposed in leading journals at the time. But the theory that won out was called the diet heart hypothesis, proposed by a scientist from the University of Minnesota named Ancel Keys. And his idea was that it was saturated fat and dietary cholesterol, found mainly in animal foods, that they would cause the cholesterol in your blood, your serum cholesterol, to elevate. That would lead to fatty buildups in your arteries, and that would eventually constrict them such that your blood flow would stop and you'd have a heart attack. And Ancel Keys, as I sort of portray him in my book, he was this incredibly aggressive personality who had an outsized confidence in his own beliefs. And he was really willing to argue anyone to the death. Like, even his friends and colleagues would say it was impossible to go up against Ancel Keys. He was just a very outsized personality. He really was sort of the great man. If you believe that history moves by sort of forceful personalities, he really was the great man in nutrition science, even though he was wrong on his diet heart hypothesis. But he was able to get his idea adopted by President Eisenhower's personal doctor, Paul Dudley White. And then Ancel Keys was able to get on the nutrition committee of the American Heart Association. And this is really key because the American Heart Association was waffling on heart disease, didn't know what the cause was. And Ancel Keys gets on that committee in 1960. In 1961, based on no greater information or data or science, he's able to turn the committee around to embrace his ideas. So the first guideline anywhere in the world telling us to cut back on saturated fat and dietary cholesterol as the best measure of prevention against heart disease was that one in 1961 by the American Heart Association. And you have to realize, like, that the reason that had such a huge impact on our diet in America, but then all over the world, because we exported this all over the world and became the foundation of our U.S. dietary guidelines, because it shifted people away from animal foods over to grains mostly. Like, in the best available government numbers, you see from 1970 to 2014, like a 40% increase in the amount of grains we eat as percent of calories. We also, in that time, dramatically increased our fruits and vegetables, like by 25 to 35%. Those are big increases. And we dramatically reduced the amount of animal foods that we eat. So, and particularly high fat, or what you would have called regular animal foods. I mean, red meat came down in that time 28%, beef came down 35%, whole milk down by 79%, butter is down, eggs are down by 15, 16, 18%. So saturated fat altogether came down. So this is the huge diet shift that happens in the United States. And it happened then all over the world. And it really shifted our whole idea about what a healthy diet is.
Right.
From one that kind of what some people might call fairly balanced between animal foods and then some plant foods, we really shifted dramatically over to plant foods. Right. So that everybody now thinks, what is a healthy diet? Fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, seeds, all plant foods.
It's wild what happened. And metabolically speaking, that huge shift sort of away from meat and into refined, so many refined things, right? Metabolically speaking, what did that do to the population, in your opinion?
Well, we didn't, not in that explanation did we even layer in what we now call ultra processed foods, but I like to call junk foods. But, that also in the last decades coincided with the rise in packaged, processed, highly processed foods with lots of ingredients. So
which the majority of the population actually is consuming, even children at this point, which is awful.
We're all consuming, right?
Yes.
But let's go back to it. Also, we're not only consuming more of those, but we just are not consuming our traditional natural foods. Like we no longer sit down. We don't no longer sit down to a beef roast, which even Ansel Keys was having 3 nights a week, according to his profile in Time magazine. Wow. So, like, our idea of what is normal is so different from the 1960s. But so metabolically, what happens? Well, when you dramatically increase carbohydrates, and especially I would say sugars and refined carbohydrates, although sugar has not gone up so much over the last recent decades, but certainly refined carbohydrates have. But total carbohydrates is really the driver here. And so you see, I would say roughly like a 35% increase in carbohydrates from 1970 to 2015. Yeah. And carbohydrates, I don't know how much you want to get into that in detail, but there's sort of 2 major impacts. One is they're processed by the liver, and so they get stored in the liver, and that really drives a lot of dysfunction in the liver, including non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. But the bigger one is that they require the release. They all become, no matter even if it's brown bread or brown rice, it all becomes sugar once you eat it, glucose in your blood, requiring the release of the hormone insulin, which is like the king of all hormones for getting you fat, because hormone's job is to take that glucose, because you can only tolerate about a teaspoon in your blood at any one time. Insulin takes the glucose and sticks it into the cells in your body. Your muscle cell is the priority, but eventually, when your cells become desensitized to insulin, eventually that leads to sticking that glucose into the fat cells, and that drives obesity.
Right. So sorry, continue.
It's just a huge impact metabolically. We've become sort of a nation of eating a high carbohydrate diet. What would have been seen from the viewpoint through the lens of somebody in the 1950s, they would have seen our diet as a high carbohydrate diet.
Yeah.
Eating, including snacking all day long on carbohydrate-based foods.
Right. Do you think, what kind of place do you think we would be in today if what you described happening with Ansel Keys had never happened?
Well, revisionist history is hard. It's just speculation.
It's hard. It's speculation.
Right?
I know.
But I mean,
just
if we had not demonized meat and fat, we would be a far healthier nation. There's no question about it. Not just because we would not have shifted over to carbohydrate-based foods, grains, principally, but also, this is just fundamental, we get all our essential nutrients, including complete proteins, from the meat and dairy, the foods that we villainized. That is where the essential vitamins and minerals come in their most bioavailable form, the form that humans can digest and use. That's where complete proteins come from, that we can digest and use. So shifting away from animal foods to carbohydrate-based foods really started to deprive us of the essential nutrients and protein that we need to be healthy.
There's a new essential fatty acid on the block, and it's kind of a big deal. It's called C15, a newly discovered science-backed lipid that helps your cells repair age slower, and function more efficiently. And Fatty 15, this guy right here, is the clean, vegan-friendly supplement that delivers it. C15 supports all kinds of things. Mitochondrial function, helps regulate inflammation, improves cellular repair, and plays a role in everything from sleep and mood to healthy aging. So we all need all of those things, right? I've added it to my daily routine, and I'm genuinely excited by the benefits I'm seeing and what the research is showing. Try it for yourself and get 15% off their 90-day subscription starter kit at fatty15.com/metabolic link with code metabolic link. That's fatty15.com/metabolic link with code metabolic link for 15% off. It's really one of those small changes that can make a big impact. Now back to our episode. I appreciate you saying it's just speculation, because obviously we can't, we don't know for sure, but it's really that story, even though as many times as some folks watching have heard, it's so interesting every time to me, like what happened and just where we are now and how majority of the population is, I mean, maybe it's like 6-7%, I think, that are actually metabolically healthy, which is so sad. There's so much work that we need to do, that you're doing in advocacy and all of these things, to dig ourselves out of this insane hole that we've dropped into. It's wild. So, you know, we talk a lot about obviously the obesity, type 2 diabetes epidemics, but how much of the crisis do you attribute to actual dietary policy versus food industry behavior? Because there's a lot that's happening within the food industry, and there's like a little bit of a chicken or the egg thing here, but I want to hear your thoughts on what's happening on the policy front, you know, the policy change or dietary policy front, and then what is happening within the food, what has happened in the food industry, and how much, where does this stem from? I'm sure it's a combination of both, but I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
I think, again, it's very hard to disentangle the influence of the food industry and our dietary guidelines, in large part because the food industry influences so much of our nutrition science and then our guidelines as well.
Right, it's like
so
big,
it's just this
cycle.
It's all sort of this revolving circle of influence. But like, let me give you a couple of examples of that. The American Heart Association recommendation in 1961 about saturated fat, cholesterol, the American Heart Association, as I discovered, had been launched really to be a national powerhouse by a fundraiser organized by Crisco Oil.
Perfect.
So, well, it's Crisco Oil's maker, which is Procter and Gamble.
Right.
So the American Heart Association was sort of a small, tiny organization without much power. Procter and Gamble organizes a fundraiser for them Procter and Gamble organizes a fundraiser for them in 1948, and they have a ceremony, a dinner where Procter and Gamble hands them a giant check for what would today be $30 million. And overnight, the American Heart Association is transformed into the powerhouse that it is today. It's actually, I think, still the largest non-governmental organization in the United States.
Wow.
But
on all your packaged goods, by the way, just, basically American Heart Association.
Heart Association, for a long time it had that healthy heart stamp. I think it still does. But for a while it was on things like Fruit Loops and Cheerios and hard candies because they did not have fat in them. So then the American Heart Association comes out with this recommendation endorsing seed oils over natural fats, right? So, and the president of the American Heart Association is accused by one of his colleagues of being in an educational video showing a bottle of Crisco oil. So that's just an example of how intertwined industry and our supposedly disinterested public health organizations are, right?
Yes.
But to weigh in on the side of the influence of the dietary guidelines, these are in the United States hugely influential. They started in 1980. They adopted the whole American Heart Association platform, right? So they just took on board low in saturated fat, low in fat, low in cholesterol, the whole platform. Those guidelines came to be mandated for all federal programs. So that's why they have really outsized influence. They drive school lunches, feeding programs for the elderly, the food that is the military is taught to eat. By the way, the military has an obesity problem almost equal to the general population, despite their being required to do physical PT every day.
Terrible. And if you even look at the MREs and things like that they're eating, which I had an opportunity to actually see while I was a reporter in the TV world, I was shocked at what's in. It's just literally all ultra processed foods. And I understand they have to be shelf stable, but oh my goodness, there's so many other. It's bad. Anyways, continue. Sorry.
It's bad. Yes. I mean, interestingly, the K rations, which were originally developed for the military, were developed by Ansel Keys. The K is for Keys. So that's a bit of history.
Wow.
But the guidelines are enormously powerful. You just cannot wiggle out of them. If you're a public school that wants to do something different with your menu, you cannot. I mean, I'll just tell you this brief story. I was working with a Florida public school that wanted to change its menu offerings to be higher in animal proteins and start cooking with natural fats.
That's great.
Totally not allowed.
Wow.
And the state officials in charge of organizing the lunch program in Florida, they said, well, what you can do to be flexible, you can offer more different flavored sugary milk if you want to. You can offer more strawberry milk. You can, it's no problem if you want to go vegan for certain days of the week.
I remember you talking about this online.
But it's impossible to offer kids more than like 3 eggs a week.
Wow.
So otherwise they bust
backwards.
through the cap on saturated fat. And that's a hard cap that is at 10% of calories.
That is horrific.
So national guidelines are absolutely they're like the North Star of nutrition, and they are hugely influential. Just another example, all pork was bred to be lean when the dietary guidelines started in 1980. When you flip over a food package and look at the back with the percentage daily value of this and that nutrient, that's all based on targets from the dietary guidelines. So the whole food system changed in response to the dietary guidelines. And when the guidelines came out in 1980 and said, we want more low-fat foods, the food industry did respond to that by producing low-fat foods. That's how we got the famous Snackwell cookies, which were, people thought, no problem eating these because they're low in fat, but they were all, it's all sugar and starches.
Oh my gosh. It's just a mess.
It is a mess. It's a mess. It's a mess in terms of the expert opinion. It's a mess that they are non-responsive to the range of science out there. They're completely locked into this nutrition dogma, and it's a mess because the food industry is right in there with them.
How do we get out of this? I mean, that's such a complicated question, but it seems like, in my opinion, that more clinicians are starting to catch up with the metabolic science, just coming from granted, we are in a very small niche area, right, where we see a lot of these clinicians that are adopting the actual science on this. But from your opinion, and obviously covering this and day in, day out, seeing all the sides, right, and pushing on the government side, where are we right now? What do we need to do to unscrew this, basically?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a really important question. I think under this administration currently, there is a plan and they are currently rehauling the dietary guidelines. That is, those are due out at the end of October or early November, I'm hearing. That could be a huge change because again, that policy is the single most powerful lever on what Americans think is healthy and what we're told to eat. Yeah.
I know you've been pushing to get our community to really voice the science around this, and because it's such a critical time I think, right now, no matter where you are politically, this could make a huge impact for many, 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 many years to come.
Yes. I think it really is not a partisan issue.
Right.
It happens to be this administration that has raised the issue of chronic disease.
Which is a good thing, right?
It's
a great thing.
I think we can try to all agree that it is truly a problem in our country in all kinds of ways. And, the question is, will they have the right solutions, right? So what our FDA Commissioner Marty Makary has said several times is that he doesn't believe that we got it right on saturated fats. And he got that by reading the books, my book and Gary Taubes' book, and then he put something on Ansel Keys in his book. So he knows that story, and he's talked about it.
That's great.
And I think the dietary guidelines will try to get rid of the cap on saturated fats. That would be huge.
Yeah.
That would be the first guidelines anywhere in the world to pull back from that. That would be enormous.
That would be amazing. Yeah. Well, the cholesterol piece that shifted, right? In terms of, obviously there was big warnings around you're eating all this high cholesterol food that's going to equate to high cholesterol in your blood and blah, blah, blah. And things shifted on that quietly, but shifted.
Right.
So,
That's actually like one of the good examples of weird government doublespeak, I would say.
Yeah.
Because the government, the American Heart Association and the government did their own reviews on cholesterol 2013, 2015, and they all came out saying there is no relationship between the amount of cholesterol you eat and your blood cholesterol. Huge. I mean, we had for decades been avoiding egg yolks and thinking cholesterol was terrible for your health. People still think that.
Oh,
why do they think that?
Still
thinks that because when they came out with those findings, they removed those numeric caps on cholesterol, but they still put in the text of the guidelines, healthy foods tend to be lower in cholesterol, which is based on weak observational evidence. So no wonder people are confused because we have our public health officials really talking out of both sides of their mouths.
It's wild.
And
I don't understand how, I mean, it's so confusing to the general public. I mean, I feel like the general public right now is just like, what's the right thing to do? Obviously, there's like a small group of all of us that really understand like the science and where the evidence has led us. But because there's not been that big systemic change yet, like people are still believing that, oh, you shouldn't eat so many. Like I have 6 eggs in the morning a day, and I still have family members that are like, your heart is going to explode.
Right.
I'm like, no.
Right.
So there's still so much work to be done,
right.
even with incredibly smart people. So,
yeah. But the issue is, where can people get trusted information?
I know.
How do they know which sources to trust? You go on social media, and it's
disaster,
chaos. I mean,
disaster.
I cannot believe what is on social media. So how do you find your trusted sources?
Yeah. What's your opinion on that?
I don't have a really good one.
Yeah.
I mean, I can say, yes, listen to this group or listen to your group, listen to Metabolic Mind on mental health. They're doing fantastic work, reversing major psychological illnesses. I would say, I think it's too hard to ask people to go and look at the scientific literature themselves, because that is also very confusing.
Yeah.
But I would definitely say a rule of thumb for people who are going and looking for help is to try to find sources that are not, where they're not also selling supplements or don't have conflicts of interest or don't seem to have ideological agendas. Right. And I would also, this is a non-scientific point, but I've noticed that the success stories that people have where they actually post their before and after pictures, you see that with certain nutritional approaches, and you really do not see that with others.
Right.
Like there is real evidence right before your eyes there with people who follow. I mean, basically I see it, and I know this is partially my bias speaking, but I don't see it, for instance, people going on a Blue Zones diet and being radically transformed in their health.
Right. Yeah.
And I do see it with, a bunch of these carnivore folks on the internet or the low carb people. They're sustaining long-term tremendous changes in their, in their health.
Have you ever spent hours Googling a weird symptom only to feel more confused than when you started? Yeah, I think all have. So instead, try ZocDoc. It's a free app where you can find doctors in your area, check reviews from real people, and book appointments without waiting on hold. And I love that you can filter by insurance, specialty, and availability, so you're not wasting your time. So whether you need a checkup or something more specific, ZocDoc takes the guesswork out of finding care. Don't waste time wondering or waiting. Head to ZocDoc.com/metabolic link to browse doctors and instantly book your next appointment. That's ZocDoc.com, ZocDoc.com/metabolic link. Now back to our episode. It's very obvious when you kind of look at both sides of the spectrum. It's crazy that this is still such a slow moving system. And there are physicians, I think, and dietitians and researchers who are how do those folks who are still kind of in the system at large, and maybe, especially the dietitians, right? They're wanting to push for change, but like they're still working in this slow moving system that is really, honestly, you're kind of putting your career in jeopardy by going against what the current dietary guidelines are. So from your perspective, what have you seen in that capacity, and how do people, because we get a lot of clinicians and dietitians watching this, how do they navigate that in this process until there are bigger changes?
Right. Well, certainly having policy change will help. And some of the official statements, like in the American Diabetes Association, the American Heart Association, there is language in their most recent nutrition lifestyle guidelines that is a nod to lower carbohydrate ways of eating. Like the American Heart Association says, if you fail with calorie counting, which most people do over time, we believe a low carbohydrate option is valid and supported by the science. Huge. The American Diabetes Association says it is the low carbohydrate, very low carbohydrate diet is the most effective nutritional approach for glycemic control, which is what you're trying to do with to manage or reverse type 2 diabetes, or to help people manage type 1. So there is language. It's not loud, but it is there. I think the new dietary guidelines may include language about a low carbohydrate option, which would make it much easier for people.
That would be great. Yeah.
I mean, I'll tell you one interesting thing to note, just going back to where people get their conversation. I've spoken to a lot of people in this current administration, and I am amazed to see how it is populated by young people who have had serious health issues, which is now so common, autoimmune conditions, obesity, and they were healed by watching some of these YouTube influencers, which are probably commonly known, but that is the way that, they learned from Ken Berry, or they learned from
Georgia
Cynthia
E.
Thur, or
all
Georgia
the
E.
Like misinfluencers, right?
how to heal
crazy.
themselves, and they're deeply influenced by that.
Yeah.
So, but getting back to the dietitians and nutritionists listening to this, I think the landscape has eased up over the last 15 years. I mean, 15 years ago, people were fired for offering different nutritional approaches, or hauled before boards to review them. I mean, I think that still happens, but I know that happens to a lesser degree now.
That's good. It seems like things are kind of very slowly sort of shifting over time. I would love for you to share a little bit more around, saturated fat obviously has become this enemy, and I think a lot of people still have it very wrong. So share a little bit more about the necessity for this type of fat in the diet from your research into studies around it.
Yeah, I think for saturated fat, there's sort of two ways to approach it. One is what is beneficial about saturated fats. And here I think the strongest argument is you have to eat some kind of added fat. Right. Is that going to be seed oils or margarine, or is that going to be natural animal fats? Yeah. What are you going to choose if you choose something to cook with or put on your toast or whatever? The evidence against seed oils is, to my mind, quite strong. And here I just want to go back to our story about Ansel Keys. Yeah. When he came out with that recommendation in 1961, it was based on very weak evidence. There was really almost no clinical trial. Like, I think there was one that was maybe uncontrolled on 20 people. And scientists around the world understood that this hypothesis, the diet heart hypothesis, was not based on solid science. So they undertook large randomized controlled clinical trials all over the world. We now call them the core trials. Mm-hmm. They were on altogether some 67 to 70,000 people, huge clinical trials lasting years. So in England, in Finland, in Norway, many in the United States, none of these clinical trials could show that the people on the higher saturated fat diet, and now I'm talking like up to 18% of calories as saturated fats. That's what quite high by our standards today, but it was considered normal back then. None of those trials showed that the people eating a lot of saturated fats died early from heart disease or any cause.
Yeah.
So they lived just as long, and the vast majority of those trials showed no effect on any kind of cardiovascular events like heart attacks and in most of the observational studies we see, the more saturated fat you're eating, the lower your risk of stroke. That's a very consistent finding.
Wow.
So you could say, I mean, one argument that's persuasive to me is that we as humans 2 million years ago obviously evolved eating saturated fats as part of meat.
Yeah.
And so ancient foods that we were evolutionarily designed to eat should they should be grandfathered in, let's say.
Right. Yeah.
Like we should consider them healthy. Our human biology is designed to use them and absorb them and become dependent on them, versus an entirely new industrial food where the burden of proof should be on that food, say red dye number 2 or whatever, to prove that it's safe.
Right.
It's new. It comes out of a factory. Our bodies may or may not be able to process it safely. Yeah. And that's exactly what seed oils are. Mm-hmm. Even though they've been around for so long, we don't even think of them that way. But sunflower, safflower, canola, soybean is the main one that we consume in the United States. They have only been in the U.S. food supply since the early 1900s. Yeah. And their extraordinary rapid rise up to 20% of calories now, that's the single biggest increase in any food item that we consume.
That's wild.
And it perfectly coincides with the rise in all kinds of chronic diseases, which is not causation, it's just association.
Right. Thank you for mentioning that.
From those core trials, which is a more rigorous kind of evidence, we know that people on the high seed oil diets in those clinical trials, in 3 of those studies, they died at higher rates from cancer. Significantly higher rates, which were of such concern to the National Institutes of Health that in the 1980s, there were 5 separate meetings to address what was going on with these people who were successfully lowering their cholesterol by switching their source of dietary fat, yet dying at higher rates of cancer. Right. And they really never answered that question to their satisfaction.
Jeez.
So I think there are clear harms of seed oils. So when you're choosing, like, what fat am I going to eat, I think saturated fats has a better safety record, in addition to our having evolved to eat them.
What if the missing link in your wellness routine was milk? Not just any milk, colostrum. Cowboy colostrum is the real deal. First day, whole milk colostrum from grass-fed cows raised on regenerative U.S. farms. No additives, no weird powders, just nutrient-rich, immune-boosting, gut-supporting goodness. I'm just starting it myself in between breastfeeding and chasing wellness and watching my skin bounce back, all of those things. I'm really excited about what this could mean. This stuff is never watered down or overprocessed. It's small batch, ethically sourced, and third-party tested for purity, which I love because it's really hard to trust products on the market. So this is a big deal. And right now, you can get 25% off your first order of Cowboy Colostrum at cowboycolostrum.com with code Metabolic Link. That's 25% off with code Metabolic Link at cowboycolostrum.com. I know you're going to love it. And now back to our episode. There's a lot of people coming out because there's obviously a lot of talk around seed oils right now, a lot. And you, I know, were one of the first to kind of start that conversation through presentations and things along those lines. But there's a group of people that are saying, no, look at this body of research, right, that shows there are benefits over here. So what do you say to that? Because I think there's you're starting to hear more and more pushback around this anti-seed oil movement, which again is, I think, getting very confusing to the general public.
Well, I have a slightly different take than maybe some of your other guests
I'd love to hear
other
it.
people out there. Well, because the anti-seed oil movement, which I don't see as being negative, but I think they tend to overreach on their claims. Like they use observational, what we call epidemiological evidence, which shows associations but cannot reliably establish cause and effect relationships. They use that kind of evidence, which is very weak, to show that seed oils cause obesity, diabetes, heart disease, all of the chronic diseases that we face. So these are associations, absolutely, but we do not have clinical trial evidence to show. As I said, we have clinical trial evidence to show they cause cancer. Yeah. We have quite a lot of evidence to show that they oxidize, which drives inflammation in the body, which is thought to be a pretty strong predictor of heart disease. Yeah. But we don't have strong evidence for obesity, diabetes, and some of these other diseases. So I would say the claims have run away a little from overstepped the evidence. Right. The pushback against the anti-seed oil, the pushback really comes, from what I can see from industry, right? I see, why is it that every single news story cites the same few people and the same one study that was industry funded? The pushback is really that seed oils lower cholesterol, and lower cholesterol is definitely if you bring down your LDL cholesterol, that's the most important thing you can do for heart disease, which is a series of assumptions that we could easily pick apart. But just going back to those NIH workshops in the 1980s, they were super concerned about the lower cholesterol causing higher death rates from cancer. So just that alone should just give you pause. And I think the larger point to make here is LDL cholesterol is one of, let's say, 22 cardiovascular risk factor markers for cardiometabolic diseases that can be measured. Inflammatory markers,
there's so many
glucose markers. And in the longest, not randomized, but controlled clinical trial that we have on a very low carbohydrate diet, where they put out a paper looking at 22 cardiovascular risk factors on a ketogenic diet. 17 of them improved, 2 remained the same, and LDL cholesterol was the one that got worse. So if everything is getting better and LDL cholesterol is going the other direction, you have to ask yourself, should we only rely on LDL cholesterol and ignore all these others? Right?
That's the bigger question, right? Yeah. It's so interesting just when you kind of peel back the layers on all of this. One thing I really want to touch on, because I know you're a mom, I'm a mom. Yeah. And for me, something that really hits home is what's going on with our kids' lunches and just childhood obesity. Kids are getting fatty liver disease, which was something, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is just like a tragedy, right? What is happening there? I feel like the bigger picture overall is so difficult to solve with just the general U.S. dietary guidelines. But even more than that, I think there's so much on the education front within the school lunches. It feels like there's so much more to do for our kids to get them out of this situation. What is your opinion on that? Because as you mentioned, like even these schools who are trying to change their lunches for the better are having a lot of pushback, and it's just devastating what's happening to our children right now.
Yeah, just another mountain to climb for our kids.
Just another one. Yeah.
Well, I think changing the dietary guidelines would be hugely helpful. The dietary guidelines do drive the school lunch program, so there's some regulations that would need to change at USDA. But if you could get more, meat and eggs in for kids, there are experiments where they've gone in and just added eggs for kids or given them a little supplement of meat, and their grade performance improves, their behavior improves, their willingness to play and take a leadership role on the playground improves. The studies are it's mind-boggling. Yeah. And then when they do that by instead adding milk or gruel, they do not see those improvements, or with milk was sort of in between. But so I think we have to change the school lunch program if we're really going to change the nation as a whole. The school lunch and breakfast.
Right.
Like currently there's no protein requirement for breakfast. So you can, and they do just serve like packaged waffles with,
oh my gosh,
maple syrup, which is really high fructose corn syrup. That is the way the kids are starting off the day.
That's why it's awful. And I mean, as a mom, like what?
It's just heartbreaking. Yeah. I mean, I don't know, and I know moms, and I myself did this, like sent my kid to school with the hot lunch and a thermos. I made them every day, but then, they do feel like a freak.
No, right. The hot lunch. Yeah.
Like totally. Eating their meatballs out of a little thermos. But you really have to protect the health of your kid. I mean, you know this more than me probably, but once somebody's health is broken, like once their metabolism has tipped over into ill health and they're developing insulin resistance, it is much harder to get healthy again.
It is.
You really want to prevent disease wherever possible. And I guess, I was the head of the Parents Association when my kids were in preschool, and I didn't know much about nutrition then, but if I were doing this now, I would really try to get involved. If it's a private school, you have a little bit more leeway to try to get some better food or more options, at least, in there for kids.
For sure. So a call to action probably for parents to kind of get involved. If you are familiar with this information and the science that Nina's talking about, just get out there and maybe get involved in the school to see if you can make a difference. It sounds like you might be able to kind of move the needle a little.
In a private school setting.
Yeah, that's about it though.
Public schools, you really, you are not even allowed to give away whole milk.
Wow.
For free on a school campus.
Oh my gosh. It's crazy. I mean, it really, as a new mom, makes me think about what I'm going to do for schooling for my child, just based on the food alone. That, obviously you can send your kid to school with a lunch, but it's a difficult thing to navigate. And also the education for the parents too, and the family system as well. Like there's just so much to unpack. I guess somebody who's been in this for over a decade and has just done such amazing work, but there's still so much to be done. What gives you hope in all of this?
Yeah, it's
no, it's a big question.
It's hard,
but it's hard.
I mean, I really believe that we, right now, regardless of your politics, we are in a moment where there is at least attention focused on these issues.
Yeah,
right. We are this whole "Make America Healthy Again" movement. Some of it is meaningful, some of it is maybe just sort of theater and is not meaningful, but at least the attention of the nation is focused on this. And it puts a stark, there are people who are trying to argue against it, saying, no, let's keep ultra processed fake meat, for instance, and feed that to kids. There are people who are sort of being called out for really, I think, for positions that are just not defensible. But there's a lot of hope, I think, now in the energy that has been created and the attention that has been created that is focusing on this issue. And if we get better dietary guidelines with real change, I think that will dramatically shift the landscape for all of us.
Big time.
So that gives me hope.
That's good. I'm glad. What is your biggest area of focus right now? I know you're doing a lot of different things, but I'd love to hear kind of what is next for you.
Well, I've been working on I've been working with this administration a little bit, not in any formal capacity, to try to let them know about the history of the guidelines. I mean, I have probably obsessed about that more than anybody else over the last decade. So I wanted to just let them know, hey, there are these National Academy of Sciences reports that we were able to get showing what the weak spots are in the guidelines process, all of that. But I'm not formally involved. I have been doing a little bit of work on this school lunch program, seeing how we could most quickly change school lunches.
And what does that look like?
So as I said, even if you change the guidelines, it's not just like a turnkey solution where all the schools in the nation get to change. Unfortunately, you have to go through a whole rulemaking process to change all the regulations about which they're really they're very detailed about what schools have to do. This many cups of yellow vegetable or red and yellow vegetables, and this much of, and these kinds of substitutions. And they all always favor plant-based proteins over animal-based proteins. So we would have, all those rules would have to change. So I've been working on that some, and I write a Substack column, and where I've taken a little hiatus, but I'm getting back to that. And I'm working on a low-carb website that will, for so long we had, I don't know how many of your listeners know it, but we had something called Diet Doctor, which was a fantastic website. And there's really a vacuum now. Like, we're going to your question of where can people go for reliable advice without any commercial interests. So we are launching that website fairly soon.
That's awesome. And there's the newly Coalition for Metabolic Health,
right,
that we've done some meetings with. That's really exciting, kind of gathering some of the top experts together. So there's a lot that's going to be coming out there. I'll be sure to link everything that we're talking about below.
Yeah.
And upcoming, what can people do, depending on when this episode releases, but what can people do as part, if they're like watching this, like, how do we change this? How can I get involved? You've obviously mentioned parents in private schools, but beyond that, bigger picture, how can people start making change and kind of join, Dr. Teicholz in the process of getting this done?
Well, I think we just have to wait and see what happens with the guidelines. If they come out in a good way, then support them. They will be attacked as being anti-science. So for people on social media, which is where this administration lives, I think they live on X as far as I can tell. Like, get out there and tell your story and support their changes. Even if you don't like them, support the changes that you think are in line with the science. I think that's important.
Yeah, that's a good advice, because I think it's so hard right now. We don't really get into politics, obviously, on the podcast, but it's so difficult because I think there's a lot of people that want to see big change, and the government is obviously talking about ways to maybe make some of these changes within the food, the dietary guidelines, but people feel like it's so divided right now that they feel like maybe they can't even speak up about some things that they're really wanting to see come to fruition. So it's a difficult time, I feel like,
I agree,
for a lot of people.
I agree. I mean, I've taken some flack for supporting this Make America Healthy Again effort. But really the way I see it is, this is an issue that a lot of us care about and have worked on a long time. And it's just imperative to support this issue, even if it's in a sea of other political decisions that you don't agree with at all. I mean, to stay focused on this one topic, which is trying to restore health to our country, our kids. I mean, that has to be, well, for me, it's been important enough to try to put all of this other, try to put blinders on to the rest of it. But I think it's worth standing up for.
Yeah.
At least telling your story, right? And so tell your story about how you got healthy. Share that.
I think that's really good advice, because, I think what you were saying earlier, where people are sharing from before and afters, or just, sharing what's happened to them with, I don't know, type 2 diabetes and reversing, getting off insulin, stuff like that is worth sharing to people. I think it's so powerful. I'd love to hear, this has been such a journey for you. And I don't know, for me personally, getting into this field has really, it's changed everything about my personal life too, right? Changed the way you eat, the way you live, the way you think. I went from thinking about food all the time, so I was constantly hungry. And just one example, constantly hungry, to like, actually my brain works better when I'm not eating, kind of thing. So, and my dog actually was on metabolic based therapies for seizures and got off all drugs and was seizure free when we switched her to a ketogenic diet. So it's really easy, I think, for people to get into this field, especially someone such as yourself, as a like investigative reporter who like digs deep, for this to really bleed into your own personal life. So I would love to hear if you can share how this process has really changed your life for you.
Well, it has, I think most dramatically, look, obviously I'm healthier. I feel better. I don't worry about my weight. I don't think about food. I'm happy to have what many people would consider to be a monotonous diet. Mm-hmm. I have somehow miraculously produced 2 young men who prioritize eating healthfully.
That's awesome.
Which in today's world is not nothing. And
no, that's really amazing. That super mom status. Mm-hmm.
No, I mean, it's just like, I guess I was enough of a nag on that issue. I think that it does shift in, it does create questions for those of us who have discovered that our public health messaging has been not just wrong, but in my case, because I've spent so many years trying to take science to policymakers in Washington. Like, I started off very naively thinking maybe they just haven't seen all these core clinical trials on saturated fats, or, right. And working with top scientists to get them to take this information, to have conversations, to submit public comments, to all these efforts that we made to inform people of the science, thinking it's really just a lack of knowledge. Yeah. And the unfortunate realization, and I don't think this is a political point at all, but it's a comment on the way that bureaucracies work, which is they're very inimical to change. But it has made me realize that they are not interested in the science, or they have built-in inertia that makes it impossible for them to change, or they have ties to the food and pharmaceutical industries that make it difficult for them to switch course. But I have become, I guess, more cynical about these institutions and what is genuinely motivating their advice, which has really been demonstrated not to be healthy at this point. Yeah. So, and if you dig down into their statements and you see the way that they will cite trials that don't support their point, or like they'll manipulate the science, or they'll hide their conflicts of interest, I have to come to the conclusion that it is a darker world than I first thought when I started on this endeavor. Yeah. That is not an easy headspace to be living in. It's dark.
Yeah. You're like, it's constantly, it's not a place of rest and digest. That's for sure, right?
Well, which is all the more important where the way that we're all embracing metabolic health comes in, right? You eat well, get sleep, go hiking, spend time with your family and friends.
Don't stress.
Right.
Meditate.
You do have to really protect your metabolic and mental health.
You do. I feel the state of the world is very, health-wise, is very heavy right now.
I agree.
So many people are sick. There's so much. It's a challenging time on the metabolic health front. And for those of us who are so passionate about this, it feels really heavy. Yeah. To me.
It is. But it is worth fighting for, too. I mean, to every young person out there, it is worth fighting for all the people that you can. I'm sure you've had this all the time. I have, hundreds of people writing me to say that I've saved their lives. That feels amazing. You can really save people's lives.
Yeah. You've done so much amazing work with the books, everything. It really, I think you should feel very proud of.
Well, I think you should too.
Oh, well, that's very nice. Thank you. Thank you. What would you say the one thing that you would like our listeners to walk away with from this episode is, and whether it be in, thinking differently and coming out of this conversation, what would you like for our listeners to walk away with?
Well, usually I say something like, don't fear fat, or the good fat is, saturated fat, don't fear saturated fats. But I would also say, do not fear going in and trying to change the system, whatever system that you're in. It's really worth the effort. I mean, I spent a decade trying to change the dietary guidelines. Now they look likely to change. Like, it is worth your time and your effort in whatever way you can. The science is much stronger now than it was a decade ago. Like, it's worth making that effort to help people if you have time and energy and the inclination to do that.
Yeah, that's really great. Great advice. I think people will feel discouraged, but you're a great example of what can happen when you've been such a strong voice for all of us. And I know I speak for so many people when I say thank you for the work that you've done. It's so meaningful and has made such a difference for all of us in the field. And
thank you.
Really
but it
inspiring.
Really takes a village.
Yes.
I want to say that genuinely, it does take a village.
It does. It does. Well, we're in this together, and thank you so much for coming back on the Metabolic Link. I could have you on again. I mean, we could talk all day long.
Yeah.
Yes. It's really, we loved having you on the show, and we'll probably have to do this again because I know you're busy working hard to really make some change out there. So again, thank you for being here, Nina. It's always such a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you for having me. It's been really fun to talk to you.
Thank you for watching this episode of The Metabolic Link with Dr. Nina Teicholz. She really offered us a rare, unflinching look at how flawed nutrition science has the potential to ripple through decades of metabolic health outcomes. Her work raises tough questions about what we think we know and who we trust to guide us how to eat. So if you found this conversation valuable, share it with a colleague, clinician, or maybe researcher who's thinking critically about metabolic health, because this information is so important to push out there to the public. And if you want to go deeper, definitely check out her book, The Big Fat Surprise, or visit the Nutrition Coalition to explore her policy work. I will be sure to link this in the show description. And if you want more exclusive content on metabolic health and therapy that's ad-free, be sure to check out our educational platform, The Metabolic Initiative, where we offer hundreds of presentations, interviews with experts, live Q&As, ebooks, and so much more. Visit membership.metabolicinitiative.com to learn more. Your first 7 days are free. And as always, thank you so much for joining me and tuning in to The Metabolic Link. I hope to see you next time.
Do you love learning about metabolic health? So do we. It's why we created the Metabolic Initiative, an online educational platform providing evidence-based education on metabolic health and therapies for healthcare professionals and the general public. By joining the Metabolic Initiative, you'll gain access to hundreds of expert lectures, interviews, panel discussions, and even private episodes of the Metabolic Link. CMEs are available. Go to metabolicinitiative.com to get started. And as always, thank you for listening to the Metabolic Link.